Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
A leading think tank says the UK will be worse off by £500 a year per person under the government's post-Brexit plan. The National Institute of Economic and Social Research warns how the proposals agreed by the Cabinet at Chequers would leave the UK's GDP 2.5% smaller. That's compared to a Norway-style arrangement with the EU. Our economics editor, Ed Conway, has been crunching the numbers in Westminster. Ed, what can you tell us?
Well, we've heard a lot from the government about precisely how the white paper plan, the Chequers deal, whatever you want to call it, the government's plan for post-EU life would look like, whether it was the trade deal, whether it's what happens with customs arrangements or indeed product standards. What they didn't say is what the economic impact is likely to be, and that's what we've now heard from the National Institute for Economic and Social Research. They produce the models that the government relies on when it comes to building these things, and of course those models have big question marks over them. But here's what they say. This is the forecast that NISA has at the moment, relatively flat line for growth. This is annual growth. The higher it is, the stronger the growth over the next few years. And here's what they expect to happen to growth if the white paper were to be implemented. So a dip in growth around that point where it does come in after the transition point. But that isn't quite as big a dip as we see if there were to be a hard Brexit, no deal. There would be a bigger fall in annual growth. Then there would be a bit of a bounce back after that fall. Not quite a recession, but nonetheless, you can see at the far end here, you do see these lines there. The NISA forecast, that's basically based on the UK staying in something like a Norway arrangement, and then the white paper, then no deal. How does that compare when you kind of take a step back and look at the overall level of GDP growth? Well, let's have a look at that. This line here, by the way, at the top basically shows you how big the UK economy would be if there were to be a soft Brexit, a genuinely soft Brexit with the UK staying inside something like Norway. The white paper there, look at that blue line, shows you that by 2028, so in 10 years in the future, the UK economy would be about 2.5% weaker than it would be were there to be a soft Brexit. And that's equivalent to about £500 per person. How about a no deal? Well, that would be a bigger fall. By that point, 2028, the UK economy would be considerably weaker. Here's the interesting thing, the striking thing, though. The white paper, which some people depicted as being a soft Brexit, is actually closer to a no deal, to a hard Brexit, than staying in the European Economic Area, than staying in something like Norway. It does underline the fact that this would involve some sacrifices according to these NISA forecasts. It would also potentially involve an increase in inflation. This shows you inflation numbers recently and the expectation from NISA at the moment. The higher it is, of course, the more inflation is going to be. If there were to be the white paper, inflation would potentially go up a bit in 2021. That's because the pound might well fall at that point. But a no deal, a hard Brexit, would push inflation even higher in the short run. The big question, though, is why we haven't heard from the government about what they think would happen to the economy in the event of the UK leaving the EU and going to its white paper. It told us it was going to provide numbers like this. We still haven't heard them yet.
OK, Ed, thank you.